Hey everyone, this is Gabby
and Karim,
and you're listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health.
Tune in each week to hear us talk about the journey of getting into med school.
From GAMSAT to medical interviews, get the insider scoop from med students who have done it all before. So stay tuned and get ready to get med ready. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us once again. We are recording remotely today, but we're excited because we're talking all about personal questions in medical interviews. So things about your experiences, your motivations, and who you are as a person. But before we get into it, Karim, can you do an acknowledgement of country for us, please?
So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are recording today. For me personally, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, as well as pay my respects to any listeners who identify as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islanders who might be listening today.
Thanks, Karim. Yes, I also pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging of the land in which I am on, Yorta Yorta land. So, Karim, what's the point of personal questions in medical interviews, do you think?
The whole point of the personal station is to get to know who you are as a person, obviously. But it's essentially just learning about who you are so that the examiners can judge if you might be cut out for a career in medicine, which is somewhat of a subjective thing, but it's essentially looking at your experiences, your life outside of medicine, your experience getting into medicine, how you handle common things that come up in medicine, such as who you are as a team player, how you handle stress, how you handle, big assignments, things like that, so that they can judge whether or not you'll be able to do well in a career in medicine or taking a course of medicine, actually being able to complete it. So that's essentially the whole point. They're really just trying to find out who you are as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And you as a person as a whole as well. So those things outside of medicine, I think, are really important to demonstrate. So the way in which these sort of questions can be presented in the interview, it's really varied. But I think the most common ways, the first one being just really simple, tell me about a time where you demonstrated this particular attribute. That might be teamwork, leadership, or overcoming hardship or some sort of stress. The next one, which everyone should know about and hopefully know the answer to, why medicine? Or what makes you a good candidate for a position at this particular medical school? So I think the two different things about that one is why medicine? Why do you actually want to be a doctor? Why do you want to study medicine as a degree? And then the other thing is, why do you want to do it at this particular university, at this particular course? What makes this one better than the rest? Or what makes you more suited to this course than any other course? And then the last way you sort of brought up, Karim, was scenario based. So they might give you some sort of ethics scenario or some scenario that, there might be some teamwork or team conflict. And then they ask you, how would you handle this situation? And what would you do next?
Yeah, so they're essentially looking for how you might perform in different situations there. So they tend to be quite challenging scenarios, actually. They tend to really test your logical thinking and test your character in terms of what you might do. But yeah, they love giving you like teamwork style scenarios and someone's not performing, what would you do? Someone in your team is not performing, what would you do? Someone's hogging all the limelight, what would you do? Something like that. But yeah, that can be quite interesting.
Yeah. And if anyone has sat an SJT or a situational judgment test, it's very similar to that. So some sort of scenario and you have to provide a reaction to it. However, you get to speak about your reaction and you get to justify it, which I think is much easier than an SJT written exam where you don't get to justify why you would do a certain action. So you can always bring in your personal examples there as well, rather than just stating your response.
Yeah, and it's always really good to talk from experience as well, which actually leads on quite well into our next point, which is how you structure and how you approach these types of scenarios or stations. So tell your story or your experience well, and make sure that you have like a set of stories or experiences ready to go that you've understood, that you've reflected on previous to the MMIs or to the interviews, so that you'll be able to bring them up as you need, for the station. So make sure that they're quite relevant to the station as well. Make sure that the experience is not just something you rehearse beforehand, you memorize beforehand. Make sure it's actually relevant and it's important for explaining your story. And it's really important that you tell a clear story that's easy for the examiner to understand. So it should have sort of like a beginning, middle, and end, and uh, not so much character development, but just like what you learned from it, how you're going to use it in your future career. And so there's a few different ways to structure it. My personal favorite structure is called the STAR structure. So it's situation, task, action, and reflection. So what was the situation? What task were you given? What action did you actually take? And then how do you reflect on that situation? So what actually happened, or what did you learn from it? That's my favorite one, just because it's nice and easy, and it's really good, like for the examiner to clearly understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's a really helpful structure, and I think a lot of people would be familiar with it. Another structure that I sort of liked is just three questions. So number one, what happened? Number two, why is it important? Specifically, why is it important to this station or this question that the examiner is asking me? And three, what did I learn? So very similar to the STAR structure. However, it's got a little bit more flexibility there for you to adapt and change it into different situations and different questions that you get. But yeah, as Karim said, it all comes down to reflection. So before you step foot in your MMIs or your medical interviews, you need to have reflected on your experiences and your attributes. Things like, why do you actually want to be a doctor? But also, why do you want to go to this university, and what makes you a good candidate? So think about your attributes and how you know you have those attributes, and your lessons and experiences throughout life. So there's lots of different ways to reflect on this. There's heaps of different sort of reflective structures or frameworks out there that you can Google. But I think the most common one that people use is the Gibbs reflective cycle. So you can either use that as another sort of way to structure your responses in the interviews, or just as a way to reflect prior to the interviews. But we'll let you Google that yourself. But basically, the Gibbs reflective cycle is all about your sort of description of the situation, your feelings, evaluating those feelings, and how you're going to move on, or what actions you're going to take after the experience. So it's a really good in-depth reflection, I think. So definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like with any other job that you'd ever apply for, you always need to consider, why are you doing what you're doing, and why do you want to take this step in your career? And the medical interviews are exactly the same. You need to reflect on your previous experiences, why you want to make this decision, and how it's going to sort of benefit your future career, essentially. Or if you want to make medicine your career, why is that the case? Like, you really need to have a very solid understanding of that, because the examiners or the interviewers, I think, are really impressed by the students who know exactly why they're going into medicine, and they are disappointed by the ones who haven't given it a really good thought, before going into the interviews, just because it's the thing you fall back on when medicine gets hard, and medicine does get hard. So it's important to have a reason why you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Medicine is a big commitment.
Yeah.
Studying for another 4 years after you've done an undergraduate degree. And all of the training and everything that comes after that, it's definitely not just stopped once you graduate from medical school. So it's important to know that the reason why you're doing it is genuine and that you believe in it. And I think examiners can tell, even if you think that they can't, they can tell whether or not your sort of motivations are genuine or not, and whether you've actually thought about it or not. So, yeah, great advice there. And I think now that sort of comes to our do's and don'ts, we like to break it down into this really simple format because there are some key do's and key don'ts for all stations. But with personal stations, I think it's really important to show growth and learning. Demonstrate that growth and that learning from your experiences as much as you possibly can, because ultimately, even if you show some sort of, or if you tell some story about some hardship or something that makes you really vulnerable, if you demonstrate how you've worked through that and grown from that, I think that's more impressive than the actual situation itself. But also, do show off, be proud of your experiences and your development. Don't be shy, because this is your one chance to demonstrate to the examiners who you actually are as a person outside your GAMSAT, outside your GPA. So definitely take that opportunity and run with it as much as you can. And with that, do show diversity of experience. So things that other people haven't done, try to show off all of your experiences, everything that you spend your time investing yourself into, demonstrate that. And that sort of demonstrates your priorities and interests outside of medicine as well, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important also to acknowledge that sometimes, students feel like they haven't done anything too impressive before they get into medicine. I think it's important to acknowledge, because I definitely felt that way going into medicine. Like, I didn't have any of these crazy experiences, or going overseas to volunteer or anything like that, that a lot of people do when they're taking the interviews. But I did have a lot of experiences from my undergrad that I carried into the interviews, and I got in. So I know it's a bit of anecdotal evidence, which is not the best type of evidence, but make sure that you think about your previous experiences, you reflect on them, and that you are proud of them, because they helped you get to this point, and they will help you in your future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then finally, just in terms of the don'ts, the things not to do. So don't get carried away with storytelling. This does happen, especially when you get nervous. You just keep telling the examiner, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. You will lose their attention pretty quickly. So make sure that you have a point to your story and that you stick to it. Another don't oversimplify or superficially explain things, especially the moments of personal growth. So don't be afraid to highlight how difficult the situation was, and be proud of how you have changed from that particular situation, and demonstrate how complex the decisions were that you had to make. If there were multiple factors involved, multiple parties, you had to consider that sort of thing. And finally, don't be cliche. So, for example, everyone says, I'm a really hardworking person. Well, everyone is that got to this point. So don't just leave it there. Show them and demonstrate. You definitely probably are hardworking as a person, but demonstrate that and show them, okay, I'm hardworking because I did this, this, and this, or I juggle these many things, or whatever it might be. But definitely demonstrate it, and don't just give them anecdotal evidence, as I was just saying, because that's a very poor form of evidence. If they have something that they can be like, oh, okay, this person is hardworking because they've done this, they might appreciate your situation a bit more, I think.
Yeah. I think the best way to think about that as well, if all you can think is like, I'm hardworking, I'm motivated, and I'm a good learner, which are all things that people going into medicine are. If that's all you can think of, think about what your family would describe you as and what attributes they appreciate in you most. Because I think that sets you apart. It makes you more personable and it makes you more sort of whole as a human outside of medicine. Like there's other things that my family would appreciate from me more than just being hardworking, So I think that's really important to think about as well.
Yeah, I actually think that's such a good point, especially with things like, your family will probably describe you as like a kind and caring person. I think that's important to bring up. If that's something you want to show off, you can say, well, I'm kind and caring because I've done this. Or here is the reason why you should think I'm kind and caring. But always try to just give them a reason why they should think the things that you are saying you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. It's really important to back it up with those experiences. And I think that sort of brings us to the end with our most important point, and that's just be honest and be yourself, I think. What do you think, Karim?
Yeah, absolutely. Just tell a story about who you are and make sure the examiners get to know you. That's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah.
Just tell a good story about who you are and how you got here.
Yeah,
That's it,
exactly.
really. That's all they care about.
Yeah. As I said before, you've got quite a few numbers next to your name. That's your GAMSAT score and your GPA. And this MMI or medical interview is the only chance for you to sort of show who you are outside of those scores. So who you are more as a person. And it's much more personable. So take that opportunity and run with it and really use it as much as you can to show who you are and why you deserve to be in medicine. I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening once again. Hopefully, for the next episode, we will be recording in person, but we'll see what happens. But everyone, take care, look after yourself, especially if you're in another lockdown at the moment. It can be really challenging. So make sure you look after yourselves.
Yeah, make sure to look after yourselves, everyone. Make sure that you are staying safe and healthy, and that you take breaks from preparing for med school, or preparing for GAMSAT, whatever it might be. And yeah, just look after yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word about our podcast. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So send us an email or message on Facebook. All of our links are in the show notes. Thanks. We'll see you next time.